Oh, okay, I see.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us. You are here for the Building Communities of Faith Online webinar, and we are really glad that you could make some time this afternoon to be with us. We're going to get started in just a couple of minutes. But before we do get started, I want to sort of give you a sense of our setup. So we have a question box here as part of your main screen. Please feel free to type in questions throughout the webinar in the question box. You can direct them to the entire panel, or you can direct them to a particular panelist. I will be monitoring the question box and be fielding your questions to our panelists. Also, this webinar is being recorded, so we will make it available to each of you after the end of the webinar. But just so you know, you are being recorded. You are all muted at this point, but we'll see how this goes, and perhaps we can get some interaction with your questions at the end. So we'll have roughly 60 minutes of presentation, and we have 30 minutes for discussion. So with that being said, I would like to introduce our panelists. Our first panelist is Brian Barden. He is joining us from Connect.Faith. He's also a member of the Pleasantville Presbyterian Church here in New York. We also have Reverend Deborah Bronkema. She is the pastor of the Pleasantville Presbyterian Church and also the pastor for Connect.Faith, both here in New York. We have Reverend Casey Carbone, who is the pastor at Mahopac Presbyterian Church. And we have Reverend Abby Moffat, who is the Director of Education and Training at Green Faith. Is that correct, Abby? All right, so I think we've got everyone introduced, and I will turn things over to Brian, who will start us off. Oh, I'm sorry. No. I had one thing I wanted to ask you all to do. We have a poll for you because we want to get a sense of, what your interest is in this presentation and what your experience is. So here's our first poll before I turn things over to Brian. So it's, you should be able to see the poll there. How many of you are new to online community building? Select one or more of the following. So please take a couple of seconds to answer, and then we'll close that poll. Okay, it looks like we've got a fairly good mix of folks here. Okay, so some people have been experimenting, some people are brand new. Okay, so we're going to close that poll. So right now it looks like about 27% of our audience have never done anything online before. 63%, a good percentage, have been experimenting with Facebook Live. And about 11% of folks have been live streaming and tweeting for ages. So we've got quite a range of participation. One more question for the audience. Here we go. What do you find intimidating about building community online? Is it that you're not good with technology? It doesn't feel spiritual? Or just a concern that your congregation won't be able to connect? Okay. So about 75% of you have voted. I'm gonna give it one more second and close the poll. Okay, so it looks like about 26% of you are concerned that you're just not good with technology. 7% of you are concerned that it doesn't feel spiritual, and the vast majority of you are concerned that your congregation won't be able to connect. So I'm really glad that you're, answering these questions, because this is going to give our panelists some solid information to help address your concerns. Final question, final poll. How tech savvy are you? So, are you still using a flip phone? Or actually, I really love those Motorola bricks. I don't know if you remember them, but those phones were indestructible. You've got a 3-year-old Android or iPhone, so you're, somewhat up on technology, or you like to keep up with the latest trends. Okay. So most of you have voted. We've got 86% of folks have voted. I'm going to close the poll. So the good news is that most of you seem to either be up on the latest tech or, fairly confident using a 3 or so year old iPhone. We have a couple of folks who are still using a flip phone, but that should not intimidate you. We have information and resources for everyone in this audience. So with that, I will turn this over to our first presenter, Brian Barden.
Thanks, Lori. So as Lori said, I'm Brian Barden. I work with Pastor Debbie Bronkema as part of the new worshiping community Connect.Faith. Connect.Faith was born out of the digital ministry that Pastor Debbie and I have been working through at the Pleasantville Presbyterian Church in Pleasantville, New York. And when Lori asked that we participate in this, I was thinking about what I would want to share with people who are maybe thinking about digital community and digital ministry. And I came up with 3 things that I really want to share with you. The first is that a social or physical distancing might well save society, but it's really bad for us as people. And we need connection, we need community. And so I hope that everyone here comes away from this webinar willing to do something. You need to do something. The next is that as you start thinking about different digital mediums and different types of ministry, try to find the right mix of keeping tradition so that things feel familiar and comfortable for your congregants, but embrace the advantages of the digital medium. And finally, I'm a Presbyterian, many of us are Presbyterians. I know that evangelism can feel like a 4-letter word, but right now it's so important that we share what you see other people doing, share what you are doing. I don't know about your news feeds, but mine is full of all sorts of news about coronavirus and COVID-19. And I love seeing little bits of goodness and good news sprinkled in there. So share a lot. So I'm going to go through and just give a little bit more of my thoughts on those 3 points, and starting with do something. So what are you going to do? I think it depends on your context, your congregation, and your capabilities. And so if this yellow circle is your congregation, those are the people that you're focused on trying to reach. The vast majority of them use email. So, almost everybody in your congregation has an email address. There could be a little small sliver here that don't. And so it's important to keep those people in mind, but the vast majority of them use email. And for me, that makes email a great place to start in terms of building community online. If you don't have an email platform that you currently use, now is a great time to get started. There's platforms like MailChimp or Constant Contact. And what those platforms do is they allow you to put in a mailing list and then to send email to everybody that's on that mailing list. And then if the people need to subscribe or they want to forward it to their friends and their friends want to subscribe, it handles all that for you. If you're still using your email client to do church mailings, that's fine, keep doing that. But consider looking at something like MailChimp or Constant Contact. MailChimp has a forever free plan. So that means you can get started using it. And I think there's some limit, but it's like 2,000 people and 5,000 emails a month. That's forever free. Constant Contact is great. Lots of churches are using it. So start there. The really nice thing about email is that you don't need a lot of fancy equipment. You don't need to start filming yourself. You can collect things that you've read online. You can put devotions or meditations or the text of your sermon. You can share things that you found on Facebook or on YouTube, and you can add your own commentary to it. It's a great way to get started, and people can respond to the email and start having conversation in that way. So once you've set up email, which I think is a place everybody should start, you start looking at the social media landscape. The next place that a lot of people consider is Facebook. Now, Facebook is a very big player, but likely there's a portion of your congregation that doesn't use Facebook. And in this particular illustration, I made it a fairly small sliver. The size of that sliver is going to depend from congregation to congregation. But by and large, if somebody has a social media account, there's a good chance that it's Facebook. And the return on the time that you put into it, Facebook, I think probably is the next thing to start looking at. And there's a lot of different ways that you can use Facebook, whether you're creating pages or groups, there's a lot of flexibility there. And then there are other social media platforms like Twitter and Instagram. These have smaller populations. Some of them overlap, some of them don't. Some people have their favorite. But the important thing that I want to note about this diagram is that all of those social media platforms exist inside the circle of people who have email. And I think that we're going to spend a lot of this time together talking about the power of live streaming, the power of video, and I think that all of that's really important. But the first thing I want to encourage you is that you should do something. So if the thing that you can do is email, do email, do something. So that's the first thing that I want to share with you all. And the next thing is to think about how we can bring the strengths of the different mediums and the different types of ministry you do to a digital ministry, and keeping the tradition, but also embracing the strengths of the platform. So when I think about the different types of ministry and the different types of digital media, I think about it in a 4x4 grid. And across one axis, we have the availability of the content. So is the content on demand, meaning the person who's watching it can come and find it whenever they want, it's always there? Or is it live? Do you have to be there at a certain time? And you have ministries that fall into both of those contexts as well. There's some ministries that your church offers that are just always available. And there are some, like a worship service, if you're not there at 10 a.m., you're going to miss it. Along the other axis, we have sort of the audience that it's open to. There's one-on-one, like a phone call, or one-to-many, like broadcast, like the evening news. That those mediums don't give you a lot of opportunity to build strong communities, but they have their own strengths as well. And then there's multi-way conversations like webinars or Zoom conferences. So as I was thinking about what the different types of ministries you have across those 4 quadrants, depending on how you do your office hours, typically there's somebody available if somebody needs to drop in. If you have a strong active library, if you have social services in the building like counseling or food pantries, those are on demand and they're one-on-one sort of ministries. Whereas a one-on-one ministry that's live is your Sunday service, your sermon. You don't often have people, as you're giving a sermon, talking to each other about what you're saying. And you don't often have people talking back to the pastor, although if you do, more power to you. I would love to come and check out your service because that sounds like a lot of fun. So those are either broadcast or one-on-one, but they're happening live. I had a hard time coming up with what would be an on-demand multi-way conversation in the physical ministry. The best I came up with is if you had some sort of bulletin board where people were, putting happenings. But you know, and then there's the live on-demand stuff, Bible studies, session meetings, shared meals. These are all happening live, and they're having this broad communication between people. There's a lot of rich community building there. So when we turn to our digital means, our digital mediums, we see the same quadrants. So one-on-one or one-way on-demand are things like email. The email is always there for you. YouTube video, podcasts are a broadcast medium. Live, you have live streams and Facebook Live. And then when you move to that multi-way conversation, Facebook Comments is a great example of an on-demand community building tool, because whenever you go on Facebook, you can go find the post and there's comments happening and people are able to reply to each other in comments. And so that's a great way to have that community building, that multi-way conversation, but without it having to be live. And then when we move over to live, you have things like this GoToMeeting webinar, WebEx or Zoom conferencing. And lately we've been experimenting with live video premieres and embracing the comments on these live premieres. And so that's a way to have something that's live, multi-way conversations, but still have a little bit more control. So that's sort of, as I'm thinking about the different ways that you all are doing ministry in the world and how we can move those over into a digital mean, that's, you know, really sort of a high level, those are my thoughts. So I'm going to pause for just a second to make sure that I haven't gone like way off the rails. I have a tendency to get excited and talk really fast. Okay, so then I thought what would be helpful next, that's giving that framework, is for Pastor Debbie and I to talk about some of the things that we've been doing at Pleasantville and with Connect.Faith and some of the successes that we've seen that maybe could be inspiring and informing to you all.
Right, so the first thing we were going to talk about is to go back to email again. We started maybe 2.5 years ago doing a MailChimp email to people that were on our list. And we started it thinking it would reach out to people who maybe used to be part of the church and no longer lived in the area. But the exciting thing that we found, because you can see who's answering and who's being present, was that there were both people that just missed a Sunday who would log in and try to find out what was happening. There would also be people who maybe used to be a part of the congregation, and in some cases were on our list but hadn't been around for, in one case, 20 years, and ended up opening the email every week and re-engaging through that process. So that was exciting to see. We also put the ability to sign up for the email on our website, and we began to connect with people that we didn't know before. Many of them were in a situation where they didn't have a local congregation that they felt like they could be part of. They were disconnected for one reason or another. And it began a relationship that really started our sense that maybe there was online community needs beyond what we'd ever thought. So I'd really encourage something like MailChimp. You can find out that you're connecting way beyond what you might have imagined.
And the community building in an email is a little bit, it's a little bit harder to track, but right. It's an easy, approachable way. You know, we have people forwarding the emails, people who would never necessarily share a post on Facebook. You know, you can forward the email to somebody and it feels personal, but it also feels safe. And so, you know, it's a very approachable way to get started for both from the church's perspective, but also from your congregation's perspective. The next thing I want to talk about is one of the newer things that we've been doing and something we're really excited about. You know, once Pleasantville decided to suspend in-person worship services, the question came up, what are we going to do? And at the time, Pleasantville hadn't been doing any live streaming, and we weren't sure that we were equipped to do actual live worship services. But both YouTube and Facebook have a feature called live premieres. And the great thing about that is that, you know, you're releasing the video live, everybody's watching it live, but it's all pre-recorded content. And so Pastor Debbie and the musician at Pleasantville, and, you know, I hope in the future we have lay readers and other people send send videos, from their iPhone of them doing a part of the service. They send it to, to me, to one central point where it gets edited together. And that process can be as complicated or as simple as you want. There are apps for phones and iPads. They just drop in video files, and at the end you can export it and send it to YouTube. And when you go into YouTube or Facebook and you flag it as a premiere, it's like watching watching NBC at 8 p.m. Back when Friends was appointment viewing. Everybody sat down at the same time to watch the latest episode of Friends. It had been recorded a long time before then, but you couldn't watch it until it premiered. What we're finding is really cool is these YouTube and Facebook premieres give Pastor Debbie an opportunity to get into the comments. So as people are watching and commenting, Debbie's able to engage with them on that and then to comment back. And that's something that wouldn't work if we were doing a traditional live stream.
Right. Yeah, we actually felt like it was a better option. In the past, what we did was video what happened in worship and send it out on email, which we still could do, but I really think that this has given us a chance to, it gives me a chance to feel like I'm in worship with everybody else on Sunday morning at 10 o'clock on the computer. So.
And one of the nice things about these digital media is that events that are live, that were on those live quadrants from before, they can then become on demand. And so the live premiere that we show on at 10 a.m. on Sunday can then be viewed after it's done at any point in the future by anybody. And the same thing with Facebook. And it's great for us to continue to have that reach and for people to be able to continue to watch the sermons after the fact. I think creative writing's next.
Okay, I was just looking at my notes. Okay, so the other thing that we've been excited about is we started creative writing as a spiritual practice as a Facebook page. I would say that if you're going to do this, it needs to be something that you're excited about and you're passionate about. So this is an area of ministry that I've really enjoyed. And the reason I'm saying you need to be excited about it is because you need to be consistent. So if you're going to start a Facebook page or a Facebook group, you want to make a consistent presence happen. So what we do is I use a quote on Monday and a prompt on Wednesday and another prompt on Friday. And we have at this point 79 people who have signed up to be followers. The thing about a page is that anybody can see it. And so there's a sense of publicness to it. And that's what we decided to do this time. In the past, we've done groups. In groups, you sign up and the communication's just within the group. So right now, either of those might be where you want to be in ministry. In the page, what I've noticed is people making community beyond boundaries. They're from all over the country. They don't know each other, but they respond to what they hear from somebody else. They respond to, that's exactly how I feel. Or, yeah, when I need peace, I do this. And it's really exciting to see community beyond boundaries. It's one of my favorite parts of that group. Thank you.
And there's some other things that we've been doing. Last week, we've recently joined the Zoom bandwagon. It must be great to be the CEO and terrifying to be the CEO of Zoom right now, because I'm sure his systems are stretched to the max. But we did a Zoom coffee hour, and we had, I think, 15 or 16 people just sort of checking in with one another. It was really powerful. It wasn't the people that I was expecting, but it gave the people who needed an opportunity to sort of share where they were that opportunity. We've also started doing the creative writing as an email group. And so we use Google for email at Pleasantville Presbyterian Church, and we created a distribution group. And regardless of what your email provider is, you should be able to create this distribution group where you send an email to one email address, and then it goes to a whole bunch of different people. So it gives a little bit of anonymity to who's in the group. So we're continuing to experiment with other ways of building those digital communities.
One thing about the coffee hour, when Brian said that it wasn't the people we expected, I think it meets what some of you were saying. It was the people that you might think wouldn't have been able to do it. They were people that really wanted community enough that they worked hard enough to figure out how to get on Zoom. And that was really, really good. Very positive So it wasn't the tech savvy, it was the people that were socially isolated and really wanted to connect.
So Lori, I don't know if we want to move on to Casey, or if you want to pull some questions.
I will, let's move on to Casey so that we have time to get through everyone and then do the questions, but we've got some good questions coming in. So
Okay,
Casey?
great.
Hello. Can you give me screen sharing privileges, Lori?
Yes, I will. Change presenter. You should be presenter now. Yeah?
No.
Not yet. Okay. So bear with us for a moment, folks.
It says waiting to view Brian's screen.
Oh.
Can Brian click the share presenter? Or change presenter?
He should
Yeah.
be able to. Yeah.
So do I see you in the list? Let's see.
Okay, thanks,
Maybe?
Brian. Yep, yep.
My pleasure. You can tell everybody, there's nobody who's magically good at this. We're all
Exactly.
we're all
We're
learning
all
together, right?
We're all in it together.
And I'm assuming that you can see my screen now?
Yes, we can see your screen now.
Okay, cool. So I'm hoping to cover briefly some of the technological planning aspects of either trying to do live stream, or like what Debbie and Brian were talking about before in terms of creating virtual communities and worshiping opportunities. But I want to start with some disclaimers first, which is that I hope to lay out a lot of different options for those who are watching and listening. And I don't consider what I'm laying out here as a must-do, but rather lots of different options that you can pick and choose from or combine, however you want to work with them, whatever you think works best with your context, because we all are coming from different walks of life and different parts of our skills. And so that's what I want to hope to do, and just lay out a lot of different options for you all. I think something else that's important to consider when we talk about using technology in our churches now is thinking about our future or long-term use of technology. I think it's easy for us to panic, which is, I think, a perfectly normal gut reaction. But I think it's important for us to think about, ways that we can, cultivate use of these many tools in the long run, instead of making reactionary purchases of equipment. Also, sort of like what Brian had just alluded to before, I just want to say that, building virtual communities is a learning experience, and one where, we'll have some missteps or mistakes, and that's okay. And I hope that you are able to remember to give yourself some grace, knowing that this is an evolving process that we're all working on together. So some of the 3 points that I really hope to touch on during my portion here is, establishing, asking yourselves questions for what kind of goals you want to establish for creating a virtual worship or virtual communities, some different setups that you might consider, and then some of the platforms for streaming or meeting or other resources, some of which were touched on before. So when it comes to goals, I think I like to break it down into 3 general categories when thinking about what your main aim is during this time. I think you could go for a more full live streaming experience, creating a virtual worship or meeting where you can interact with participants, more of a presentation. I don't know if that's the right word to use, but a presentation where you can pre-record material and then upload them to various platforms like Facebook or YouTube. And then perhaps another way, which is however you might take some of these things and adapt them to your own context, like a hybrid model. So when I talk about engagement, you can sort of see what I'm working with now in terms of how I've set up my own equipment to engage in a live format. So whether it's whether it's you approach this kind of style, creating a more informal or modified Sunday service for how you want folks to be able to gather and be in a space where they can talk to each other or interact with whatever it is you're doing. Of course, you can include music in this, and I'll talk about it later as well, but be aware of copyright issue. If you don't have copyright that allows you to stream music virtually, you'll want to be aware of that, because otherwise you'll want to try and avoid stick to public domain hymns. If you're also doing this, I encourage you to interact with your chat or people, whether it's on Facebook Live or YouTube, as they enter in. I like to encourage people on Sunday morning, like and share this, remind people that this is a place where we can all gather. And then when we get to parts like passing of the peace, I like to, encourage people, type down below, like that you're passing the peace with one another. Let people know that you're thinking about them, praying for them, and encourage that kind of engagement where people, even though they might not be able to see one another or interact, depending on how you're doing it, to give people an opportunity where they can engage with one another in that kind of virtual environment, that virtual community. I think it was, I think Brian had touched on parts of it before where, another kind of option, like we saw this past Sunday, I know that some churches had and worship and communities had issues with live streaming to Facebook. So perhaps one option you can consider also is doing a presentation or a more pre-recorded material that could allow you to maintain a more traditional aspects of worship and preaching, but it also may allow you to try some new things as well that you might not have done before. And of course, then you could pre-record it, edit it however you want to edit it if you want to, and then upload and share with people that they are able to then view it. But I think, perhaps one of the best things for us during this time is to perhaps consider a hybrid or other kinds of things, that models that take the best of both of these approaches. For example, if you're trying to pre-record stuff and then like what Brian was saying, using Facebook or YouTube Premiere, build points into your sermon or your message or parts of worship where you could say, if you have a question about something that's come up, comment down below and I'll try and get back to it. And especially then if you're in a Premiere or live setting or a Premiere type where you're watching with folks, that's an opportunity for you to engage with them as well. So even though they may be watching a recorded service, that you're still there in the virtual space, being able to interact with people as well. And like I said before, there's no one size fits all solution to technology at this point for our churches. I think it's best if we approach whatever it is we're trying to do with authenticity, and not necessarily trying to set up mini Hollywood studios in our offices or in our churches. Because I think if we come from a place of authenticity and hope and compassion and love, that is what people will respond to. So now I saw, so it looks like luckily most of you out there are familiar with technology in one way or another. So I'm going to try and talk about different setups that you could use in your own ministry context. That range from being fairly simple to perhaps more complex if you're feeling that way, like if you have someone talented like Brian in your church. And these are just some and then I'll provide some other resources for you as well. So my philosophy when it comes to live streaming or doing anything tech related in the church is that expensive does not mean it's better. I don't think you have to run out there and try and get the best equipment if you're in that position. I think there are many ways that we can work with something as simple as a phone to be able to record and to present things to people in a way that is meaningful. So for one example, depending on your context, you could have a cell phone with internet capability that uses either Wi-Fi or a cellular plan. I always encourage that you have a tripod and a cell phone holder of some sort, so it's not a shaky video and it's for the most part straight and aligned. And if there's anything in this that I would highly recommend that you look into investing would be an external microphone for your phone if you decide to go that route. And depending on if you have a modern iPhone and even some other modern Android phones, you may need an adapter, but I find that having quality audio is a big step up in whatever it is you're doing, to have a dedicated microphone. Even if that means your video is not as clear, if you have that really clean audio that allows people to listen and hear everything you're saying, then that's a huge step. Another example of using technology in your church or ministry context would be using a device like a Mevo, or another kind of dedicated mobile camera, and again, using a tripod or external audio device. And you might even at this point, if you are comfortable with it, consider using a subscription service like Mevo x Vimeo that lets you live stream to multiple platforms at the same time, like Facebook and YouTube, which is, Brian, as you saw in the earlier presentation, that not everyone has Facebook, and perhaps not everyone watches YouTube, but perhaps if you cover more platforms, then you will be able to reach a broader audience. And again, the last one, I wouldn't necessarily recommend if you're not comfortable with technology, or but if you have someone who is in your church who would be willing to help out, who is really comfortable with technology, you could consider this. So you could get a DSLR camera or a camcorder and hook it up to your computer, which really gives you very nice looking visual, and you can connect it to things like your soundboard and whatnot. But you would also have to, I would recommend using some software as well that would allow you to modify things as well. But I'm not going to focus too much on that, because unless you're really comfortable with technology or have someone in your context that could help you with that, I wouldn't recommend exploring it as much. But if you are looking for some free, because I know this would be helpful, if you're looking for some free resources out there in terms of how to either produce content or to produce videos for your congregation or your context, if you use a Mac, you can use iMovie, which is free. And also, if you have an iPhone or iPad, you could also download iMovie as an app, which you could use for free to edit video. And to add some effects and things like that. And if you're using a computer that is Windows 10, if you go down to the like the little search bar there at the bottom of your screen and type in video editor, Windows 10 also has a free video editor that lets you add text over top of your video and add a title card and things like that. So those are two free movie editing software or services that I highly recommend to people who are looking to try and make things. And if you're looking to get more into the audio side, Audacity is a free audio editing software. And if you're looking to broadcast more detailed or perhaps do a more complex or detailed live stream or video recording, you could consider a free software like OBS, which stands for Open Broadcasting Software. Like I said before, because I want to emphasize it again, that I feel that higher quality sound is better than higher quality video. Also, I would encourage you to really consider looking at some closed captioning systems as well, if you have that capability, for people who may be hearing, who may have a harder time hearing. So for example, I use a free service called webcaptioner.com that captions, that takes my voice and captions it, that I can insert into my live stream. It's not perfect because it's an AI, it's computer based, but I find it gets things right 95% of the time. But of course, if you have a third party software, or you ask someone in your church who maybe has those skills, that is something you could consider as well. And like everything else, I recommend also, if you're going to do live streaming, I recommend that you test the live stream before your actual event or meeting to try and help make things a smoother process. So now I'm going to move into talking a little bit about social platforms, the who, what, where, who, what, where, and how of things. You know, I think we all know Facebook as a term to put out content and live streams and other videos that we would want to reach out to people. The upside is it's free, and it lets you publish videos, live streams, and other content. You could even do some polls on Facebook. Another pro of it also is that it can be accessed by anyone if you're talking about live streams, assuming that your church Facebook page is public. So that's something you would want to make sure. You can go into your settings on your Facebook page and check that out. Because if it's public, then people will still be able to access your live stream even if they don't have a registered Facebook account. The only downside is if you also have a website where you typically put videos and things like that, or we're thinking about doing, Facebook doesn't let you embed videos onto a website or blog like YouTube does. But the upside of Facebook though is I think that it's fairly easy to use if you're using it from a mobile app and you can go live. And there's lots of different ways that you could use it as well to create virtual content and virtual community. YouTube, of course, maybe you're not as familiar with YouTube, but it's also a service that lets you live stream and publish videos there. But it's more video based than content based, like that's more word based or picture based like Facebook. The upside, like Facebook, is that it can be accessed by anyone, and you can also embed your videos or share them to your church website or blog if you have that as well. If your church doesn't have a Facebook page, you may find it difficult to set one up. But again, I encourage you to reach out to people in your different contexts to see if they would be able to help you out with that if you don't feel comfortable doing it yourself. And then I think another one that we've all been hearing a lot about recently is Zoom. You can use Zoom for free, but it has limited features, including call times, and you're not able to call in anymore currently to Zoom calls on the free version. So I at least recommend that you consider the $14.99 a month version. You do save a little bit, I think, if you pay annually. And the upside of that is that you can have meetings where people can see face-to-face or a virtual coffee hour, which we've tried at my church experimenting with it as well. And it was great for people to be able to see one another. And like what Debbie said before is you're sometimes surprised to see who's using it because the people you might have thought would have had a harder time, they're able to access it. And you can also, if you decide to worship via Zoom, you can also have the ability to stream that to Facebook or to YouTube as well. For our church, you know, we've luckily had deacons who've been able to help walk people through or, you know, have a group of people walk those who might have a more difficult time through using Zoom. And so that's something you may want to consider as well. The last sort of social platform I'm going to recommend at this point is if you would like to upload podcast versions, just the audio version of your sermons. I use a free service called Wishka, and it lets you publish to services like Spotify and iTunes. So if you go to Spotify or iTunes and you search for the First Presbyterian Church of Mahopac, you'll find us. And you can record, if you want, a little intro and outro. And so it's an easy way that I have found to also encourage people to say, you know, on Sunday, you know, so this will be up later, and, you know, feel free, you know, share it with people. So that they're able to share it with friends or family. And I'm always surprised by who I hear back from, saying that, oh yeah, I'm friends or family with so and so, and I listened to your sermon last week, and it really, so it's just one more way in which we can provide access for people depending on where we are. So lastly, I just want to say, what I feel is best practice is also, if you're going to do a live stream, is if you do prayer requests, encourage people to respect the privacy of others. If they don't have permission to share, then I would ask that they don't share it, because whatever platform we're going to be doing it on, it's most likely going to be public and it's not private. So if you're going to share, I usually ask people to please make sure they have permission and to not share too much. Zoom, I think it's best if you do mutual invitation or hand raising, however you want to do that. Something you might want to look into if you have people who are not tech savvy is a service like free conference calls, which lets you also record meetings audibly so people can call back and listen to it. And if you use a lot of social media, you could also consider Instagram and other things as well. And for myself, I use another service that lets me publish to Facebook and YouTube. And I think Lori can send out these slides later if I'm going too fast, but I just want to make sure that I cover everything.
Yeah, everyone will receive the slides and a recording of the session later this afternoon. So
okay, actually, which is good because I'm on my last slide here, which is that I think some other important things to consider during our conversations about virtual worship and virtual communities, which is copyright, to make sure that you have appropriate licensing for whatever it is you're using music for if you're not using public domain hymns. Also, child protection policies, if we're talking about protection of our younger members, how have you thought about adapting your current policies to virtual hangouts and activities? So for example, I've been talking to folks here in our presbytery, Hudson River, about, what does it look like to have, transitioning, so if you have a Zoom meeting with your youth, that you have two adults there, and they've taken it to the step where they also record meetings as well, which is part of what was done by their school district. So I think it will be important for us moving forward is to also think about ways in which we can still maintain best practices even in a virtual space. And then lastly, I think it's important for us to consider accessibility. How will we continue to be an inclusive community during these times when we're not able to meet in person? So whether it's sending out hard paper copies or having willing to explore things like closed captioning, what have you, since there's all these different tools out there. I think that those three things will be important for us to consider as well as we're in this virtual time and place. So thank you.
thank you, Casey. Okay, so we have a ton of questions for all three of you so far. We want to move over to Abby, and then again, I remind everyone we'll be taking questions after, when we get to the question period. So Abby, Casey, can you give me back the screen sharing control so that I will have that? Okay, great. All right, so I think we're ready. Abby, let me know when you want me to start sharing something.
Yeah, great. Hi, everyone. My name is Abby Mohop, and I'm the Director of Education and Training at Green Faith, which is an interfaith and international environmental nonprofit that is based in New Jersey. I'm actually based in Texas on a regenerative farm where I am the artist in residence and increasingly the IT person, but I also work as the instructional design director at McCormick Theological Seminary in Chicago, where we pivoted very quickly to bring all of the classes for that seminary online. And so I, for the last 3 years, have worked remotely, mostly on Zoom, and spend most days about 4 hours a day on Zoom, and thinking about how we create community on that platform, but also then how we bring in other kinds of technology and resources into that. So, I'm going to share a few of my tips and tricks in terms of best practices, and underlining some of the things that my colleagues have shared with you already. But then also invite us into a space of co-working together to really get you to begin to think about how we do this together. So for me, the most important thing when we're meeting together online is to think about how we facilitate conversation and how we imagine the purpose for how we gather online, which is so similar to how we gather in person. So when you're facilitating a conversation, and if we're using Zoom online, using that platform, I would be unmuting all of you, and we would practice something called Stack, which is a conversation begins and the facilitator asks a question or begins to think about, begins to think out loud or to teach. And then when people have a question, they say their name and then the word stack. And that it kind of just like cuts into the conversation, or you could use the chat option and type in that. And that allows the facilitator to pay attention to who wants to say something and to call on people in a way that lets a multitude of voices be heard. There's also nonverbal cues that you can use in the chat box, and that can be passed between a variety of different platforms, including things that my colleagues have said already, like Facebook and YouTube and Zoom. And those nonverbal cues allow your congregation members or community members to respond to what's being said without having to say something out loud or to spend a lot of time writing into the chat box. And we use this both at Green Faith and at McCormick. And we just learned as a faculty at McCormick these nonverbal cues, and it helped the faculty feel heard. And it was they learned very quickly. And these are the nonverbal cues that I suggest. And Lori has a document that she's going to send with an image that you can share with your community if you choose to use them. And the nonverbal cues, the signals that you would put into whatever platform that you're using, are plus signs for agreement, putting an asterisk into the chat box if you want to be put on stack, or if you have a question, and then using the @ sign and someone's name to respond directly to someone in the group, but doing that in public, right? So for example, if somebody wrote in the chat box, you're having a conversation about the book of Genesis, and somebody says in the chat box, you know, my favorite part of Genesis 2 is when God puts the human into the garden to till it, and you could respond to that person and say, you know, @ that person. That's a beautiful comment, and I wonder if you've thought about how it's translated into the Greek. And I assume that none of you will be kind of in that deep of the weeds, but I use that solely as an example. And so the tools for how to facilitate a conversation with those nonverbal cues will go out in a document that Lori has. And so much of that is about practicing the facilitation skills that each of you have already in real life. The other thing to just say, one last thing about that, is that so often we struggle with telling people to stop talking. And this is an opportunity for you to say to your people and to say to each other, when we talk out loud, we actually don't have a very long attention span to that. And so how can you invite people to pause and to listen? And how can you use our online time together as a way to do that? So those are my initial tips and tricks. And as I said, that those will be going out. There's a whole long document that will be shared with each of you. But this other question, right? So facilitating a conversation and then imagining how we gather together. This is how I want to spend some time together next. When you envision how you're going to be together online, how do you prepare for that? Well, when you're in person, you think about how you'll set the space. Are we going to be in worship? Are we having a session meeting? Are we doing adult education? Are we having office hours? What needs to be in that physical space? And that's the same question that you ask when you're in a digital space. And again, my colleagues have offered some of the technological and theological questions that to bring into that space. But we know what to choose from each of those things because we ask the question, how am I going to set up the space and what is this space for? So I'm particularly thinking of Casey, pulling up all of the different recording opportunities and like apparatus, and then showing you his recording space too, right? That's how he set up his physical space. But then also what digital space are you creating as well? How are you inviting people into your digital meeting or your worship space so that people feel welcome? How are you setting up rules like, here's how we're going to interact with each other in the chat box? Or how do you tell people, here's how you use, this particular platform that we're going to use? So making space, as Lori did at the beginning of this conversation, to say, here's how this platform works, and we're all going to practice by answering questions in the poll, and I'm just going to take a temperature check for how we're doing. So what Lori did at the beginning helped us understand that we're coming into a teaching space and a place where we'll each get to have our voice heard if we want to through asking questions. And then thinking about, after you think about space, thinking about how you'll facilitate. In our work at Green Faith, we spend a lot of time thinking about our purpose and our outcome for everything that we do. And we do that by literally sitting down and saying, what's the purpose of what we want to have happen? And what's the outcome for what we want to have happen? In this time of coronavirus, this is not an opportunity to have more meetings. The rule, you should never have a meeting when you could send an email, still is in play. So don't have a gathering just because you want to. Have a purpose and be clear about what you want people to get out of it. So at Green Faith, we always stop before everything and say, why do we want to have a gathering? What's the purpose? And what do we want to have happen? So I want you to pause and think about one of the gatherings that you want to have online. Maybe it's worship, maybe it's a session meeting, but just pause. If you have a piece of paper, write this down or think about it in your head. What is it that you want to have happen? What is the purpose of that event? And what do you want people to get out of it? So really stop and write it down. I'm going to give you 20 seconds. What is the purpose of whatever event you want to create online. And what do you want people to get out of that? What's the outcome? And I'm going to give you about 30 seconds to write that down too. Okay. As you begin to think about those things, what the purpose of each of those events are and what you hope to get out of them, their purpose and the outcome, you'll begin to think about how to do them, or what we call the process of things. And as you think about the process, you've already gotten tools from Casey and Brian and Debbie about how to put those in practice. And you'll need to make space for a lot of prep time. But I hope that you'll enter into that prep time from a place of grace and humility and a sense of call. And that all three of those things will help you say it doesn't have to be perfect. It just simply has to meet the purpose and the outcomes that we're trying to get to. I want to show you two examples very briefly of how congregations have said the purpose of our time online is to lead worship and to glorify and honor God, which is, by the way, what the point of worship is, even in person, isn't it? So, Lori, will you pull up the link for, yep. So this is First Baptist Church in Rochester. And the pastor, Brent is a friend and doesn't really have a background in technology. And so they've set up their website to be clear and honest and pastoral, so that the work of the church to continue to glorify God happens. And so their website has clear information about where their response to COVID is, a clear way to get in contact with the church, but also a really clear way to get online to worship. And when they live stream, it's mostly Brent's face having a conversation with his people. There aren't slides. There's no fancy tech setup. It's him with his people. And if you go, so that's one way to do that, to do worship. And this website kind of gives you a feel for how low tech it is, though it's also simple and clear. They're clear that what their purpose is in this time is to worship God. And Laura, if you'll go to First Pres Palo Alto. Bruce. Great. So their pastor, Bruce Reyes-Chow, is very well versed in technology. And so he has spent a lot of time curating Zoom resources and also setting up their congregation so that they're ready to jump right into Zoom and online worship. And so their purpose is also to worship God on Sunday mornings. And he's been able to do that pretty seamlessly and high tech, right? And so you can see in the upper right hand corner the link to their Zoom worship service. And if you choose to go to their worship services online, there's a lot of like slide decks, and it's very interactive and kind of has this high tech feel to it. So those are the two worship examples that I want to give you. But I want to end my time with you offering one other example, and that's the daily calls that we are doing at Green Faith to create communities of care and resilience in this uncertain time. For half an hour every day, we gather with people across multiple faiths and multiple countries to sit and pray together and to be in community. And we sat and thought about the purpose of what we felt called to and the outcome. The purpose was to gather people together and create a space of respite. And an outcome is that we wanted people to feel connected and supported. And the process, the agenda, and how we are doing that is through these daily calls. It has taken a lot of prep. We spend 4 hours a day preparing, doing, and then debriefing. And that allows us to fully support the people in our community. If you would like to be a part of those daily calls that meet on every day at 4 p.m. Eastern, you can go to our Facebook page. So just search greenfaith.org and Green Faith on Facebook. That's what happens when your brain works faster than your mouth. You go to Facebook and search Green Faith. You can find a link for today.
Okay. Thank you, Abby. Thank you for your presentation. Thanks to all our presenters. I think there's a lot of really good information that we've received, and I know that there are a lot of questions. There are a ton of questions in the chat, so let me get everyone back on camera, and then we can begin going through these questions. That's my camera. Is everyone coming back? Okay, here we go. We've got 3 of us. Sorry, you're seeing me gesture wildly. I forgot I was on camera, and we are all working from home, aren't we? So don't pay any attention to the teenager in the background. Okay.
Okay.
So let's go through some questions. So we had some very specific tech questions about how do you stream to Zoom from Zoom to Facebook or YouTube. That I think was a question that came up very frequently. So can I toss that to Casey and we can start there. Casey, can you hear me?
Sorry, if you give me screen sharing privileges, I could show people from my computer if you want.
Okay, yeah, that would be great. Just a second. Jay's presenter. Why are we not having that work?
I got it.
You got it? Okay.
Yeah. So
Okay.
if you're trying to, I think Brian, I saw posted something in one of the answers about it also. But assuming that this here is your Zoom meeting, you're starting the meeting, you're waiting for people. If you have at least the pro level account on Zoom, you can go down here, and you see that there's those 3 dots or so on the bottom, or there's a more option, I guess, on that very bottom bar. And if you click more, you can select, go live on Facebook or YouTube. And once you click that, then it's just a matter of, inputting the information you want to input. So, you select then where you want to share it. So, I could say share it on a page I manage, my church, and then I would just have to enter in the information and click go live from there. So yeah, and then if people are able to see what Brian had shared in the chat, there's a detailed Zoom guide as well that can walk you through how to stream as well. Is that what you wanted me to cover, Lori? There?
Yeah, I think that was the question. And let's see. Yeah, that was the question. Can we include the written questions and answers in what we share? I will do my best to include that, the transcript of what is shared in the things that we email to the group after. Okay, we also had a question for Abby. Abby, would you mind repeating your explanation of what Stack is?
Yeah, so if you're meeting it's particularly good for a larger group of people. So for like 6 or more is how we use it. And so if you have something that you want to, if you want to be the next person to speak or add something to the conversation, you simply break in either verbally or non-verbally and say, for example, Abby Stack. So you're telling the person facilitating the conversation that you have something to say. It won't actually mean that you necessarily get to speak, because the purpose is to make sure that everyone gets a chance to, so that there's like a spreading out and a diversity of voices. So if I'm just keep continuing to say Abby Stack, the facilitator might be like, Abby's trying to talk too much, which is a legit thing.
So. Okay. We have another question. We have a few questions actually about the coffee hour and like a virtual coffee hour and how that works. And if you could share that with the group. I know some of questions have been answered in the chat, but that's not available to the entire group. So if you could touch on that.
I can tell you how it worked, and maybe Casey can tell you more about how to make the technology part work. But what we did is in our email that we sent out on Saturday night and then again on Sunday morning, we gave people the Zoom contact information. And then people either called in or used their computer like we did today. And we ended up having about 18 to 20 people that showed up for the virtual coffee hour, which was pretty cool. There was some troubleshooting, like why can't people hear my voice or that kind of thing. So it's good to play with it beforehand so you know what kind of issues might come up, get a few people to practice it with you. And then what we ended up doing is just checking in. It worked pretty naturally going around the room. We had considered doing mutual invitation, which I've done on other calls. And that is where you model in the first place saying, you know, a sentence or two, and then calling on someone else to share. And then people can call on any other person. If you're called on and you don't want to share, you can say, I pass for now, or I just pass. That helps if it starts to get a little out of line or out of hand, if everybody's talking at once and no one's hearing. That's mutual invitation is an Eric Law thing, a really good resource to look into. And that helps for this kind of making community. But in ours, it worked pretty well. And then I'm going to model it by saying, Casey, is there anything that you can help them with in terms of technology?
You know, I think that's important what you said, Debbie. And I think, you know, once you're in the Zoom meeting, you know, from there, I feel it's, you know, it's things are pretty clear in terms of, you know, being able to see and hear one another. I think perhaps I would just also add, you know, reminding people that they are on camera. So what? So we will see what you're doing. So.
Right. Very good point. Very good point. So there are actually a number of questions around music licensing and how you use music. My understanding is that the PCUSA has made some free access to licensed music available through their website, but if you guys have other thoughts or recommendations, please put those out there.
Well, I mean, the reason, I don't want to talk if Abby or Debbie have anything, but you know, I think the problem with music in terms of live streaming, especially on a platform like Facebook, is that you know, if you don't use public domain music on a place like Facebook, Facebook currently, not to my knowledge, has a way for you to add licensing information, so that even if you had a music license, Facebook, there's no current way for you to add that information to it. So if you do use copyrighted music, you run the risk of either your live stream being shut down or partially muted, or the video later on when it stays up on your Facebook page being partially muted as well. So, you know, like, let's say you have music playing during a communion part, or, you know, a prayer part, and you're speaking and playing copyrighted music, there's a chance that as you're saying the prayer with the music going, that you'll be muted. YouTube, it's not as strict. I mean, YouTube will flag a video if it has copyrighted music, but it typically just means then that you can't monetize that video. That still doesn't mean you should use copyrighted music just because you don't have a license or permission to use it. Like, you know, like someone said, also Presbyterian Publishing has also granted use as well. So I just as someone, I see Laurie popped in. So even if you use music that you wrote and copyright, YouTube, you could probably handle it. Facebook, again, if you copyrighted it, may or may not mute that portion of the audio. It seems to be hit or miss. So that's really all, you know, that's what I want to lift up when it comes to copyright, is that it's Facebook, it's going to be a hit or miss if you choose to use copyrighted music, and YouTube, it'll be a little more forgiving.
Okay. We have one question, particularly around people at the lower tech end, or for people who are just not online at all. So if we know that there are people in our communities who are not online, or not comfortable, what would be the best approach for incorporating those people, or you know, reaching out to those people so that they don't feel like they're left behind?
I think the easiest is email. If they don't have email at all, then I'm just using phone calls. And, you know, I don't know any other way to share online if they're not online. But yeah, that's the best thing that I can figure out at this point. We have started to do some postcards that some of the kids drew to go out to our seniors who are now, you know, behind locked doors in nursing homes or assisted living. That's been a good way to reach out.
I have heard some discussion, and you know, you guys would might be familiar with this, with some folks doing like freeconferencecall.com to, you know, pull a few people together, even for an evening prayer, or you know, something like that, if their folks, again, are completely not connected, but again, still using the phone as a resource if you're trying to do a group.
That's a good idea.
Yeah, and free conference call, as far as I know, also is the only one that lets people be able to call in later and access a recorded meeting or conference that you had. Zoom I know doesn't let you do that, and even a place like Uber Conference doesn't let you either. But I know that on free conference call that you have the ability to record if you type in the appropriate star number combination, and then people could access it at a later date.
Cool. Okay, a question around cost. Casey, can you give us a sense of like what, maybe like 3 tiers of budgeting for equipment? Like, I know you said that the sound is probably more important than the video, and I think I second that. So like, do people need to have like a freestanding mic setup like the one that you have, which looks awesome? Or you know, like, what are the options at different, you know, maybe 2 or 3 price points that people can reference?
No, I mean, I say if you already have a cell phone, right? If you already have a smartphone that has Wi-Fi or cellular connectivity, you could buy a fairly inexpensive mic that you could hook into the headphone jack and just clip on to the side or to the stand, the phone holder if you choose. And then if you throw in a tripod with that, I think you could do something reasonable for under $50, $60. I mean, it depends on the quality of the equipment you want to get. So that's, what I would say if you choose to go that route, assuming you have a smartphone, because if you don't, then you would have to budget for that. A mid-tier range, I think it would be fair to, if you were using something like Mevo, that you would want to consider budgeting around 4 or more. Of course, so there's options in between. If you used a laptop that you had on a webcam, a separate webcam, you could probably do that for less than that. And then the last option I had given, when you have a separate dedicated camera and audio, then you're probably looking at more like 800-900 plus, or realistically more than that even as well. But if you have a smartphone and you want to just invest in a better microphone and a stand and a holder, you could do that for less than $100 easily.
Okay, we are getting several questions around communion. So have people done communion online? What is that like? How do you do it? Can you give us some examples? Or yeah, Abby?
Yeah, so First Presbyterian Church in Palo Alto, one of the examples that I shared is doing communion as normal, and that the way that they're doing that is sharing ahead of time with their community that they should bring something to eat and something to drink, remembering that our that communion and the Last Supper was taken happened with easily available things, right? And so inviting people to bring their own thing. It's like bring your own communion, BYOC, and doing it that way.
Okay. Let's see. We have a couple of questions about MailChimp. Does MailChimp provide two-way communication? Can someone on the list send an email to the group? So I can answer that question. MailChimp is really just a push platform. You create the message and it goes out to the group. Any replies to that would just go to the sender's, info box or to your email box directly. So in order to have two-way communication, I would think that something like a group, some kind of a Facebook group or a Google group or direct email communication would be what you're looking for.
Right. Yeah, we've used Google Groups for that. You can do it for Bible study or anything that you want to do written. Google Groups work for that.
Yeah, I think the Google Groups are a great resource for a lot of things. You can, create a place where you can post articles and information and share that with the group on a regular basis, as often as multiple times a day or once a week.
We also use MailChimp to invite people to sign up to be in a Google group. So that was a decent tool. We just had a click to a link that if you want to share your email with, it would end up being with me, then I can put it into the Google group.
Okay, so we're closing out. One more question. Can you give us a sense of, this is for Debbie, of the kinds of things that you post on your Facebook group or in any group for a prompt when you're doing your writing groups?
Yes. Yeah. So this week the theme was noticing, and the quote was from Barbara Brown Taylor. Whoever you are human. Wherever you are You live in the world which is just waiting for you to notice the holiness in it. And then the prompts for writing were pay attention to the moment right now. What do you see? What do you feel? What do you hear? What do you taste? And then look at your list and what surprises you? What did you notice that you wouldn't have noticed if you hadn't been paying attention? So that would be a week's worth of content actually, and then people respond along the way.
Okay. Well, I'm going to say thank you to our presenters who are off camera and on camera. You know, this has been a great session. We really appreciate you guys making time to share with the community. And we have had some requests for, you know, would you be interested in sharing contact information? So I want to let everyone in the group know that, you know, slides that Casey used are going to be sent out, as well as a document that Abby created with tips. I think Debbie and Brian were putting together some information for us to share with the group as well. So keep your eye out for that information, which will be coming shortly. As you're signing out of the webinar, we have a short survey for you to answer a couple of questions, give us a sense of what topics you might want to go more in depth on, and we will be using that to consider future programming. So I want to thank everyone once again for joining us, and everyone stay safe. Okay.
Thank you.
Take care, everyone. Bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.